Hello and welcome to Our Voices. I am Bárbara Ferreira Santos, joined by my colleagues Amina and Simenez. Hello, ladies. Hello.
Hello. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again.
2023.
I'm so glad to be here. And today we're going to recap a little bit of 2022 again, but talking forward. Last year we saw more women than ever running for political seats across Africa. We also witnessed a record number of women of African descent running for office in countries such as Brazil and the United States, home to the largest African diaspora in the world. Despite the progress in the number of candidacies, the total of elected or nominated women in positions of power is still very low when compared to the gender and race distribution of those populations. Some of the challenges female candidates face are similar both in Africa and in the diaspora. They've been a target of abuse, political violence, and even death threats.
Kenya, for example, had a record number of women running in last year's elections, but many of them have denounced harassments and abuse directed towards their campaigns. In total, 29 women were elected members of parliament in 2022 out of 290 representatives, 6 more than in the last general elections. In Angola, for the first time in history, women were sworn in as vice president and head of the parliament in the 2022 elections, occupying 2 of the top 3 government seats just after President João Lourenço.
We also have Tanzania, where for the first time a woman is the head of state. Samia Suluhu Hassan was sworn in as Tanzania's first female president in 2021, and this has a great symbolic value beyond Tanzania, showing that African women can govern, but not without a challenge, given the belief that women cannot be rulers. Tanzania also has more women cabinet ministers than ever before.
On this week's episode, my co-hosts and I will share stories from women in the continent and in the diaspora who are trying to carve a path towards gender and racial equality in politics. We'll also look at challenges ahead. Ladies, let's first start with the progress we're seeing on the continent recently. Amina, I'll start with you.
You have to start with me because Nigeria's elections is coming up soon, and I'm super excited.
All eyes are on Nigeria.
I'm so 100%. And I have to say kudos to the Electoral Commission in Nigeria for the bimodal verification accreditation system, because definitely rigging is going to have a very, very minor to non-existent role in this particular election. So if women decide to participate, as long as they buy the confidence of their people with their manifestos and they go out to their communities and they make themselves known and seen, definitely this year is going to be a game changer, and I'm super excited and super stoked to see what's going to come.
Wouldn't you say Nigeria's participation, women participation in this election, I saw that it is 8%. Wouldn't you say that this has maybe a reason?
I mean, women's participation is low, that's true. 1, because the political climate isn't very conducive. 2, some women just choose not to participate, to be honest. So there are different reasons as to why women don't participate. But now with more opportunity, we'll see whether it's going to increase significantly or not.
I just want to see more women doing it.
Exactly. Going to Ethiopia, like we mentioned in Tanzania, the country appointed the first female president in 2018, Sahle-Work Zewde. She's an experienced diplomat, and actually previously she had this position as head of UN offices in Africa Union. Again, she's the first woman to have this position too. And even though Ethiopia's presidency is more of ceremonial, still it is very significant that a woman is filling this position. Again, we have a very known women's rights advocate, Maza Shanafi. She is appointed at the same time as Chief of Justice for the Ethiopian Supreme Court. And that was another encouraging for women and the role they can be able to play for their societies. And we also have the chairperson of the National Election Commission, Burtukam Mideksa. She's also the first woman to hold this position.
And obviously, whatever happens on the continent has an effect on the diaspora. As we see, Brazil has the largest African diaspora in the world. More than half of the Brazilian population is of African descent. But Afro-Brazilian women still struggle to get elected. One approach used to increase the number of black women in politics was the collective candidacies, a group of people running for office together. Let's understand.
Brazil has almost 213 million citizens, and 56% of them are self-declared black or a mix between black and white. It's a total of almost 120 million Brazilians of African descent, the second largest black population worldwide, just after Nigeria. Brazilian women of African descent specifically are a total of 28% of the country's population. But that ratio is now reflected on the political sphere. Out of the 513 people elected to the Brazilian Congress last October, only 29 are black women, or 5.6% of the House Congress. In a country with such a deficit of black women in politics, a solution found to amplify and strengthen their representation in legislative houses in federal, state, and city levels were the collective candidacies. They are formed by a group of people who run for office together but occupy one seat in a city council or legislative assembly. One person of the group has a name on the ballot and is the official elected representative, but they all share responsibilities and policy decisions during the mandate. Councilwoman Elaine Mineiro is member of the collective Quilombo Periférico, a group of legislators from the black movement in the suburbs of São Paulo, elected for the city council in 2020.
No município, antes dessa legislação.
In the city, before this mandate, before 2020, only 2 black women, although we are the majority of the population, were elected as councilwomen. Theodosina in the 1970s and Claudette Alves in the 1990s. And in the year I was elected, 4 black women got elected as leaders of legislative mandates in the city of São Paulo. With the idea of the collective mandates, other black women could also occupy this place.
Mulheres negras também puderam ocupar esse lugar.
Councilwoman Elaine Mineiro says that with more black women participating in the political decisions of the city, more topics related to the black population started being discussed in the House.
Ladies, one of the things that when talking to Councilwoman Elaine Mineiro stood out to me is the fact that she has to walk with a bodyguard. All of her co-counsels had to move from their houses, change addresses, because of the dangers of being a politician and being a woman in politics in Brazil and in São Paulo, because of Brazilian history with, violence towards women in politics. So they had to take measures to be safe. So when you get to those positions, you also have so many challenges. And one of the things that she said was that when they started having more black women in the discussion there, topics relating to the black population in São Paulo started to arise, and cases of racism started to arise even in the discussions between council people. So you see how the structure of society is.
Definitely. This was definitely an eye-opener for me. Now it makes me appreciate that in Nigeria, when you're a woman and you're attacked, they only take you to the courts and try to drain you financially so you have nothing to run your elections on. Right?
I also really think that this is interesting that the Brazilian law accepted to have this collective candidacy,
Yes, precisely.
Right? Because...
It's a workaround, actually. What happens is that one person has a name on the ballot. So the way the way they govern is together. So one person is the leader, is the one that is there. But their decisions are in group.
Yeah, but that's very creative, to find that gap in the law and work around it. Because I really wonder if this will work in Africa.
We have a task. We need to go find out if our country's constitution allows it.
But I wonder if it works in Africa because, there are a lot of structural barriers, legal barriers. And in addition to that, there is a society thinking, we need a society that can accept these women and elect them and then put them in politics.
And I have our guest for today is Dr. Dalila Negreiros. She has a doctorate degree in African and African diaspora studies from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and she's a specialist in anti-racism and public policies. Currently, she serves as the Human Rights Secretariat at the University of Brasilia. Dr. Negreiros, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and I'll start asking you, Black Brazilians, Black female Brazilians are at the, they are the backbone of Brazilian society. They are leaders in their communities, they are leaders in their households, they are leaders in the schools, but we don't see them taking positions of power. How do you see that? What are the challenges for Brazilian women to get to positions of power?
So, thank you for the invitation. It's such a pleasure to be here to have this discussion. Starting from your question, so the challenges are not based on education or the quality of Black women candidates. most of the politicians elected in Brazil are white businessmen. So for a long time, it was hard for Black women to even be candidates. Even women in general, thinking about white women, Black women, indigenous women, and other racial groups. That is why in the 90s, Brazil instituted affirmative actions for women in political parties as candidates. So we have like 30% of quotas for Black women. This is the minimum that each party should have. But even though some parties could not reach this small number, to Black candidates, it is difficult because also a lot of politicians are related to other politicians. So they inherit the networks and the connections they need, to be considered for the job. Money and access to resources is a huge problem because political campaigns are very expensive. Mm-hmm. So because Brazilians are in the bottom of the social pyramid, so we are not huge business people and all those, networks and connections and family money and family resources, all of that is very important to be elected in Brazil. Mm-hmm. So if I could pick and choose, the challenges are unlimited, but the two biggest challenges are the access to resources and even, as you mentioned, the safety, because it's dangerous to do a campaign as well. It is dangerous during the campaign, so we have some states that are highly violent during the campaign. We had cases of quilombola leaders being killed during elections. We have that's the same for indigenous leaders. So it's quite dangerous, and you need resources to be visible, to be elected, but you also need resources to protect yourself during the campaign.
Mm-hmm. I just heard the challenges you mentioned, and they seem very familiar, even from where I come from. Can you compare these challenges Black women in Brazil face to the challenges African women face to be in politics? Do you find similarities in that?
Well, I know that Africa is such a big continent, and it also has positive experiences. As far as I know, in Uganda, you have countries that have a bigger representation of women. You have African countries, of course, that have Black women as president, and this is something that we never had in Brazil. So I think some African countries are quite ahead in what they achieved in the representation of women in politics. But I think what we might have in common, at least with some countries, is this challenge related to access to resources. And even some countries, you have the thing about, those families that are in power for a long time, and it's really hard for someone new or someone that is not related or connected to a powerful family to be considered to certain political positions.
Right. So my question would be kind of a follow-up to what my colleague Seminesh asked. So we have a shared history, obviously, the continent and places like Brazil. And Barbara was letting me know that the Yoruba culture is one of the cultures that has really thrived and still remains quite prominent in Brazilian culture. I wonder, did you also inherit some of the cultural barriers that would stop women from participating in politics?
Well, actually, you know that in Brazil we do have candomblé, umbanda, and some religious traditions or some cultural practices. And it used to be one of the places that would respect female leadership. So we do have some important people in our history that were leaders, community leaders, considered, respected because of our ancestry of, respecting women and respecting ancestry. But when we talk about political structures and political power, of course, there is this European model as well, right? So it is complicated because in the cultural level, some some people would respect this leadership and this position, but when it comes to voting and the politics, it shifts, what is considered important or the priority. And even when we think about the politics and the policies and rights, it is quite recent when, Black people in Brazil reach the access of politics against racial inequality. Like affirmative actions in Brazil, for education, have like 20 years or so. And the cultural policies are a little bit longer, but still quite recent in the country's history.
Dr. Negreiros, thank you so much for being with us on Our Voices, explaining the participation of Black women in politics. It's now time for a break. We want you to share on our social media platforms your expectations for female political representation in Africa and in the African diaspora. We are on Facebook at VOA Africa, on Instagram and on Twitter we are VOA Our Voices. We are also on WhatsApp, and our number is US country code +1 202 503 9025. When we return, we will look at what Nigerian voters have to say about female candidates running for next month's elections. We'll be right back.
From around the world, let's go.
Welcome back. You're watching Our Voices. We're talking about female participation and gender-based violence in politics. A 2021 study from the Interparliamentary Union shows alarming results on sexism, harassment, and violence against women in parliament in Africa. The study heard 224 women from 50 African countries, and 80% of them said they have experienced psychological violence in parliament. 65% have been subject of sexist behavior or remarks, and 42% have been threatened with death, rape, or physical assault. Ladies, these numbers show a reality we have been reporting about in the continent, in the diaspora. We've seen images of a protest in Brazil because a councilwoman in Rio de Janeiro in March of 2018 was killed after participating in an event for Black women. She was a human rights defender known for denouncing police abuse towards Black people, and that shocked the country first because it showed to our faces that Black women were being threatened at all times when they were in positions of power and when they were denouncing problems of our society regarding racism, but also made many of those protesters say that her voice would not be silenced and the voices of Black women would not be silenced anymore in the country. And that's something we see everywhere in the continent as well.
Yeah, I mean, violence against women, be it physical, sexual, emotional, this is, I think, one of the biggest pushing factor for women not to be involved in politics. I think also parents discourage their young girls and their daughters not to be in politics for fear of, being exposed to violence, especially now with the advancement of technology. The number of women getting attacked online and the kind of harassments they face, including, exposing them in a very embarrassing way, is really is something that is increasing. And I think, that's one of the pushing factors for women not to be in politics.
Sometimes even by association. So you have a parent in politics, or like the example that we gave of the First Lady last week, her husband is the one who's in power. But yes, she was the one who was attacked for allegedly consuming the poor people's money, and that's why she was gaining weight. So sometimes it's not even about you being the one contesting for elections. Just by association alone, you get harassed, you get bullied, you get abused. And I think the psychological damage has a longer lasting impact because then you transfer that to future generations of young women.
Yeah, just because you're a wife of, that's a good point you made, because just because you're a wife or the daughter of a politician, even man, you are a victim of harassment and attacks.
Certainly. But still, general elections will be held in Nigeria on February 25th. But the polls are at risk of being cancelled or postponed because of rising insecurity, according to the country's election commission. Nigerians are hopeful for the elections, and some voters shared with us why they think more women should get elected this year. Let's take a look.
When we look at indices, statistics that there are today, we see that women, especially in Nigeria, are underrepresented or are not really participating in politics as they should. In Nigeria now, I think if you look at the statistics, you see that about 6.7% of women only are active in politics. And so it goes to say that, and that is way below the global index. And then it means there is the need for women to rise up and be participants.
Between 2015 till date, there have been a lot of encouragement of women being into politics. Thank God for our past First Lady, who made it possible during the time of President Jonathan, who made 35% affirmative action for women. And the journey has been on, but we still need more.
You now ask, why is it that women are not participating? We look at the reasons. We say, okay, we are in a patriarchal society where the man dominates. There's no equity and equality, and so women are not given a fair level playing ground to participate, where you see that maybe the rules of politics are not really fair.
Yeah, I think the women need to support each other, most especially when it comes to voting. So if women have this awareness that the more women we have in politics, the better it is, then they will now make that move to have more women representing them. So women themselves need to work harder to have more women in politics.
Women should have a voice in politics because anything given to a woman, she multiplies. Whatever you give a woman, she multiplies.
Wow, I think that one of the things that stood out to me is the fact that Nigeria, first, is the most populated country in Africa. And it's a country that, as we talked before, has a huge impact on Brazil and in the diaspora. So all eyes are going to be on Nigerian elections right now. And one of the things that I think that for women to get to positions of power is that we got to climb so many layers of social oppression to get there as well. Talking about the diaspora mostly, or the Yoruba people and so many other people who went to Brazil and were oppressed through so many years. In Brazil, so many layers to get there, so many difficult things. For one of the things that Dr. Negreiro mentioned was the access to resources. Is that in Nigeria, Mina, like a problem as well?
So the thing is, when you look at it legally, there really isn't any obstacle, so to speak. You can have whatever a man has legally. Can you run for president if you're a woman? Yes. Can you run for governor? Can you do whatever it is that you want to do? Yes. But obviously, there's going to be a gap in income. There's going to be a gap in influence. As Dr. Negreiro mentioned, people inherit political influences and connections. So obviously, you will find a gap there. I believe more women need to have the confidence to take what they want. Because what do these men have? They had the confidence to move forward, to acquire all these connections. So if we really want it, we really need to have the confidence to move forward because the structures are there, the opportunity is there. But you need to have the confidence to mingle with those men. I will tell you that there are religious restrictions, there are cultural restrictions. If you're afraid of being looked down upon, then stop caring about what other people think or what society may think, because here's the thing, the victor is the one who writes history, right? So it's not going to matter how you got there. Once you get there, everyone's going to forget that, oh, you were once slandered and called so many different things. You need to, I feel as though women, especially from my cultural background, if you want it, go get it. It's right there. It's right there. You need to have the confidence to move forward. Have the confidence to reach out for it. If you want, these days you have things like GoFundMe. If you come out online, even if you don't get the money within your country, you will find people outside of the country, people in diaspora that will be willing to support you.
Yeah, as you said, I mean, despite the various challenges, be it legal, cultural, or other systematic barriers, women continue to fight and participate in politics. Last year in Kenya, one female politician caught many people's attention because of her fight to increase women's participation in politics. She is our woman to watch on this week's episode. Alongside other Kenyan female leaders, lawyer Susan Kihika, elected as the first female governor of Nakuru County, wants to clause in the Kenyan constitution enforcing that no more than 2/3 of any elected or nominated body can be of the same gender. Let's take a look.
This time was really historical. Like, we may not be getting it now, but I think down the road we'll look back and say, I mean, very many women were elected. It's not very many when you think about it. Like, I'm not talking about 50% of women were elected, but so much more than we've seen before. One, I think as a country we've become more conscious of the fact that even women can lead. I also believe that in those spaces women have been, they've been doing a good job. So it has helped make the community or the society a lot more also aware of the capabilities and competencies of the women as well.
I think we need to see more of like her in Africa, wouldn't you say?
Definitely.
Yeah, stories like that make me hopeful for
Yes.
our countries, for
Yes.
women worldwide. For Black women, especially in the continent and in the diaspora. I think that we need stories more like that to get inspired and to inspire little girls as well. That's a place for us all.
Yeah, I mean, politics by the end of the day is our way of life. Whatever we do, it has to do with politics, and we need to be involved with, women need to be involved in decision making so that it works for everybody.
Thank you, ladies. That's our show for this week. We look forward to bringing you more stories, introducing you to the phenomenal women this year. On behalf of my co-hosts and the Voice of America, I am Bárbara Ferreira Santos. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.